As I was reflecting on our conversation today, I was thinking about research from John and Julie Gottman that shows that for a relationship to be really healthy, we need about 5 to 1 positive to, let's say, negative comments. And we kind of all know this to be true that offering love and grace and affirmation to each other really helps our relationships. And yet it can be so hard to focus on our strengths and each other's strengths. You bring such an expertise and a passion for helping people acknowledge and celebrate and create space for their strengths in workplaces and other organizational spaces. And so today I wanted to talk to you about how do we do that? What makes it hard, why it's important, and how do we shift our habits to focus on our own strengths, our loved ones' strengths, our colleagues' strengths, our collaborators' strengths, etc. And so thank you for coming to have this conversation with me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me into this inquiry around strengths and why it's important. Let me backtrack to an experience for myself of how it landed differently. Oh, wait a minute. This is why strengths are important. This was when I was first diagnosed with breast cancer 11 years ago. And it really was a place of me recalibrating and reorienting myself. There was one incident where I was talking to my daughter and brushing her hair. She was 7 years old and she doesn't like it. Of course, young
Mm.
kids, knotted hair, it's not really pleasant to it when that happens. I caught myself in that moment while I was brushing her hair and saying something around, you know, what would other people think? How would you go out looking like this? Stories that I myself experienced when I was young. And that
Mhm.
for me was like a turning point of, oh, wait a minute. Why am I carrying certain narratives over? And where does these narratives also show up in the other ways that I connect and engage with others? That negative framing of how other people might perceive you, that really got me into thinking of why do I automatically see the negative side of this? And do I want to continue being that mother, being the collaborator, being a facilitator that at the start of engaging with others is the first thing that I would say is like, oh, there's a problem here. So that 11 years ago became an inquiry of what is it really about the ways in which I experience the world from my culture, from my education, from my lived experiences, and then noticing the same patterns that people have as well. We tune into the problems because our society, the systems that we've created from the judicial system, the educational system, all of the current dominating systems
Mm.
are very pathological in nature. You go to a doctor, and the first thing is, what's your problem? You go to a lawyer, and they would say, what's your problem? You be in a room with a team. There's a problem here. What's the problem? The systems that we've built mirrors the systems of our nervous system because as individuals, we are so wired to look for threats. Our nervous system still looks at it from the lens of hunter gatherer. Like, you go out of the cave, you might get killed. That threat and safety and how can I preserve myself mode. And our nervous system is still the same. Our nervous system is so wired for threat and looking for safety. Everywhere we go, we're searching for it. What's the threat here? What's the problem here? And so we've designed a society that's very much focused on how can I mitigate? How can I minimize the threats? so that I might be safe or my loved ones be safe. There's nothing wrong with having that as a means for caring, for tending. Yet we've gotten too accustomed to it. But we forgot that alongside the sufferings are the strengths that we carry.
It's so true. If there's a tiger or a wolf or whatever the predator might be in the place where our ancestors lived, if we're not primed to notice that, then we could very quickly die.
Yeah.
And also, it occurs to me that we live with systems that do not keep so many of us safe. So many of our needs for safety are not met, and the systems focus on problems. And so those two factors lead us to be hyper vigilant, to try to meet the need for safety, to answer the questions about what our problems are. And then that continues to program our minds to think in that way.
Exactly. And you know what? Fires together, wires together,
Right.
right? This is why our nervous system really mirrors how society is.
I'm going to ask a really counterintuitive question, given our focus. Why is it a problem? Why is it a problem that we focus on problems so much?
It is not a problem if we also look at it alongside. We got so immersed in being so problem focused that we forgot that alongside everything else, we inherently have strengths from our lineage, from our lived experiences, from how we've experienced the world, our character, our cultural strengths, our cognitive strengths. These are all part of us. And that's the part that we fail to mirror back.
So we'll ask that question from the other side. Why is it so important that we focus on strengths?
When we look at strengths, we can also then amplify the ways in which those strengths show up. Right? And we can use those strengths to tend to the problems. Okay, then there is an issue here. How can I use my strengths to address this problem or this tension?
Can you give an example of how focusing on strengths can help us amplify them?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do with organizations is to help them make sense of change, right? So change in itself is so chaotic. It's a very unpleasant space to be in, right? There's a lot of tension, there's a lot of grief, a lot of unresolved issues, there's uncertainties. Right? And when we become too problem focused, we fail to acknowledge that, hey, wait a minute, we might have had experiences before that we can lean into. When we're looking at it from a lens of strengths, we look at where was our growth before when we were navigating change? How did we do that? What did we learn from that? And how can we apply that to the situation now? Or what are the parts of that growth that we've experienced before that we can make use of in the situation that we are in right now? So it shifts the strategies then that we employ.
Those two questions, like, why is this a problem? And why is this important? Are so adjacent. They seem like two sides of the same coin. And yet, if we follow those lines of inquiry, they can lead us to such different places. I can imagine you working with a team or with an organization and working on change. If they're asking, why are we struggling? They'll likely go in a very different direction
Yes.
and expend so much more effort and energy than if they're like, okay, what works?
Yes, exactly. And this is why whenever I'm being called to support organizations, my first question is, what's already working well? And they're stumped because they're used to having a consultant, having someone ask them, what's the problem and how can I help you with that? So for me, my approach is, how can I surface the strengths immediately so that I can tap into those strengths when tensions arise or when challenging points of the conversations arise. I can easily pull in, oh, you mentioned a while ago that you value connection. How can we use that in this situation right now? So bringing it back to the strengths that they inherently have.
You just asked two questions. One is what's already working? And so just inviting listeners to have that percolating in the back of their minds, like what is already working for you? And then the second question you asked was, how do we surface strengths immediately? How do you do that with a team or with a client?
So it varies. In organizations that invite me to offer a facilitated team building experience for them, one of the exercises that I lead them into is allowing them to map their strengths with the work that I do for Neurodiversity Foundation. So we've started Neurodiversity Foundation 8 years ago. I started articulating our brain strengths as an educator, a child development specialist. So I've been into spaces where whenever a child is being told, oh, this is a problem child, there's always labels. Oh, she just goes from one thing to another and does not finish task. And so I started articulating, oh, the child has a novel brain. She likes novelty. She likes to follow through with interest. And so narrating it from a place of strengths created a different way of looking at the child. And so I started playing with what are our brain strengths? What are our cognitive strengths? And how can we use that as a way to surface the ways that our brains and our nervous system process information? So that work has been since 8 years ago, and I've expanded it into a multidimensional part of looking at strengths, not just your cognitive strengths, but also your character strengths, your values, beliefs, convictions that you have that is very much a part of who you are as a person. Right. And then the last bit, what are our cultural strengths?
Mhm.
What are the strengths that came from being oriented by a particular culture, by our heritage, by our ancestry, by our lineage? And how do those cultural strengths come into play when we are engaging with people? Fascinating enough, I just did this exercise of mapping cultural strengths a couple of nights ago for a queer refugee program. One of the activities was I've created this fun mapping. So there's a space to put in a photo. I got my photo printer, pasted their photo, each one that came in, pasted the photo. And then there's just the three boxes that also contains a question of what are your top three cultural strengths? And then I gave them a listing of the cultural strengths and have them just really tune in with themselves of how can you introduce yourself with your cultural strengths? They've written it out. And a big part of the exercise was okay, now go around the room, find someone else who shared the same cultural strengths as you are. And then they had dinner together. Conversations was so amazing because they started sharing about how these cultural strengths show up in their lives, how these cultural strengths show up in their relationships, in their work. One person said, wow, this really gave me something to talk about who I am as a person rather than just the usual, I'm 21 years old and I'm studying this or I'm working on this. And that for me is the beauty of strengths. We get to see the essence of people because then they show up from these different dimensions of who they inherently are as individuals.
That just sounds like such a rich conversation that you were able to support them to have. I'm thinking about how vulnerable it can be to share our strengths. And so you holding this expectation that, of course, the thing to do, the thing that we're going to do right now is talk about our cultural strengths, immediately creates such an increased amount of safety to share that essence of
Yeah.
who they are.
Because it's
Yeah.
there, right? It can't
It
be
is.
denied. It's there.
It's right there under the, yeah.
We did one exercise with bankers. We did brain strengths, introducing neurodiversity. And At the first part, people are so quiet. We were sharing a bit of the introduction and then said, okay, we're going to do an exercise. Here are the different brain strengths. Choose your top three and then find someone that you work with closely. And then we had certain questions. One of the questions was, if you need help, what would it be that you would ask me for help on? And then what are the strengths that you see in me? So they went and partnered with someone and they started interviewing themselves with their strengths. And the room was buzzing. It immediately shifted from being quiet to chatter to giggles. They didn't even want to stop. We had set a 20-minute time for that exercise of 10 minutes per person. And they're like, no, but there's still so much more. Sharing strengths immediately takes people to, oh, yeah, this is me. This is who I am as a person.
It seems so relatively easy to just ask those questions and so much fun. I feel a sense of lightness, like there's a playfulness that's immediately invited.
Yeah, there is. And at the same time, it can also be very difficult when people are suffering. So there's a sensitivity that needs to be brought in when we're talking about strengths, is to also be in a space where if people are struggling, that they're also okay to express, it's difficult for me to access my strengths right now. Creating that as an invitation for them to be okay with whatever it is that they're bringing in that moment. Right. So this is not a toxic positivity framing.
Totally.
This is an invitation to resource ourselves and this resourcing of what is internally a part of me already. That practice of resourcing can be difficult when they're going through a lot of challenges. And so sitting with it is also very important. Allowing people the time, the energy, or just even allowing them to disengage.
Yeah.
Maybe this is also an invitation of rather than doing the strengths is to do grief work.
On one hand, it can seem super simple to just ask the question, right? List your top three strengths. And on the other hand, this is not about sugarcoating. This is about sharing essence. And if there has been trauma, if there have been challenging dynamics in a workplace, we could go on and on and on about all the reasons why it could be really difficult to expose that more essential part of yourself. There's a respectfulness and a pacing that's needed in asking these questions, even though on the surface they may seem pretty simple. And so I'm curious if someone doesn't have a facilitator to bring in to do this work, how do you encourage people to bring this into their workplace? In many workplaces, people are grappling with pretty challenging people dynamics. So, what are ways that people might bring these questions into their workplaces in supportive ways?
I would say we can do it from different angles. Like it can be at the start of the meeting, as part of your check in. It can be as simple as what's a growth that you've noticed for yourself lately, right? That immediately puts them back into looking at, oh, what are my strengths for the past month, for the past quarter? I love the question, what's alive in you right now? A window, it's an opportunity to really get a glimpse of what's making this person come alive. You can really just normalize it as part of the culture that we have this check-in questions that we can use and it differs from time to time. Another area can be through HR, the way that you ask questions when you're hiring people, when you're doing performance reviews. I specifically hate it when performance reviews are actually feedback reviews rather than performance reviews because what happens is you spend probably 5 minutes talking about, hey, you did this well. And then the rest of the 55 minutes is how you need to improve on this and this and this. Let's shift the conversation to What are the things that you've noticed that are going well for the person? Ask the person what do they notice that's going well with them. So this is moving away from the pathogenic to a salutogenic framing. Salutogenic framing is really looking at the wholeness and the wellness of a person, right? When we move away from just the problem, we also open up opportunities to explore what are the other areas that are thriving, that are nourished in that person, and how can we surface that in the conversations.
So you just named several really important, helpful pieces. You named check-in questions at the beginning of meetings, hiring practices, and performance reviews. Just focusing on the check-in questions for a moment. Those are so important. I sometimes find that teams ask much more superficial questions like, what's your favorite color? Or like,
Yeah.
what's your favorite sport?
That's really staying with the superficial.
Yeah. Right. And it could be important to know, like, I love dancing, you love canoeing. That's great. And also, it doesn't really help me get to know the person better. Do you have a resource with check in questions that we
Yes.
might share with people?
In the University Education Academy, we do have a list of questions that you can start with. But I would even go for, again, it's creating a culture where this type of conversations are encouraged. Depending on what the culture of openness and connection is in the space, I would go with, the chili questions. Do you go from one chili or two chilies or three chilies?
Like, how spicy?
So so you do not immediately go deep if the room is very new, people don't have an experience of working together. It's part of reading the room, being able to know what's in the space with you, right?
I often find for the less spicy question, that still strength focus is just what's brought you joy recently. That can be so easy. Do you have a link to, is this a resource that people
Yeah.
might
We'll
access?
just definitely share the links.
Perfect.
Um,
Okay. I'll put that in the show notes. Performance reviews. Say more. I'm so curious. How do we structure performance reviews in ways that do give feedback that's needed and also really celebrate everything that's going on? I mean, part of it is having performance reviews far more frequently than is the norm in most organizations. Can you share more?
uh, I can give a very concrete example. Say, for example, you're the team leader. Just go through your questions and then to look at it again from that lens of, oh, is this problem focused or is this strengths focused? Just do an inventory first. One way of flipping the narrative is when we can notice and observe for ourselves what exactly are my questions asking, and are they geared towards problem solving or are they geared towards surfacing strengths?
Can you give a couple of examples of what performance review question may be more problem focused and how that may shift to more solution focused?
So let's give a tentative person being coached by a team leader, and that person might be neurodivergent and has been reported as being difficult to work within teams. And in a performance review, there most likely would be, and I've been told or there has been feedback given to me that some of your team members have difficulty working with you.
Mm.
Now you're getting into that problem focused territory.
Yeah.
So, in a more strengths based perspective, it would be, so let's look at team building. In what ways do team building shows up in the work that you're doing right now? And in what ways do you see team building working in those interactions? And so, gathering that input from the person would create a different type of conversation.
I can imagine people thinking, yeah, but what about giving that feedback? Are you suggesting not?
I'm not saying, again, this is not toxic positivity. It's just more of surfacing what's there from a lens of, okay, what do you think about this? What's important for you around this? The person might say, yeah, sometimes I get so frustrated with decision making when there's so many people that needs to be consulted with, and I'm the type who likes to do things quickly. That's a strength, right? I am a doer that does things quickly. If there's an idea in my head, I want to execute it immediately. And it makes it frustrating for me when I cannot do that because I have to consult everyone in the team. That kind of conversation you would not easily get if you're starting with, hey, I've been told that you're this and this and this. So, how do you get into that kind of a conversation where the person can easily share or can surface, these are my strengths within the team? And then you can mirror that. I was like, oh, I'm hearing that you want the executions and decision making be done quickly. In what ways can we do that for you?
Yes.
That will become a point of tension. You're
Yeah.
encouraging him or
Yeah.
her to generate ways in which to do that. And it might also mean that, oh, is this something that you can talk to your teammates about?
Right.
How should you create the space for this conversation to happen? So it gives you a space where the person's more enthusiastic, more reflective, more interested
Yeah.
because they're bringing in, hey, this is what's coming up for me on this.
For example, might a team leader share the feedback that's coming up, but instead of coming at it from a, why are you doing that? Or what is wrong with you? Or that needs to stop place, coming it from it with a real energy of curiosity, with the assumption and knowledge that that person who the feedback is coming about has strengths, has so much to contribute, and probably cares. I think most of us, even though we live in systems that don't support us to live our strengths or to care for each other, actually want to be good team members. And so we might give the feedback with that genuine curiosity and then ask, like you're saying, tell me more. How is it for you to be in teams? What's important to you here? And listen for that, like that. Oh, it's important to me to get things done quickly. Like right on. Not all urgency is bad. Not all quickness is bad. Okay, that's interesting. How do we support you to really be in that strength of quickness and also to work with the strengths and the needs of your team members? Is it like that?
Exactly. In nonviolent communication, my trainer emphasized what Marshall Rosenberg shared of we can easily connect on the level of needs because we all have needs. Where tension arises is when our preferred strategy on how to meet those needs differ. And when we're talking about performance reviews, there are different strategies that come into play. And how do you make it known what are the preferred strategies, right? So the person's preferred strategy is I want to have decisions quickly so that I can execute quickly, right? And probably the teammates' preferred strategy is, but we need to discuss about this and have a consensus of how do we go about it, right? So it's looking for where are the conflict in strategies because, like what you said, most likely they'd want to be able to contribute to each other's work. They'd want to be better team players. So it's going through the process of figuring out what's really there. And we can do that when people are open to receiving it because you're starting from strengths. You're not putting them in a defensive state. Because let's face it, even when you just say, hey, you have a feedback here, just the word feedback immediately gets our nervous system into threat mode of like, oh, what did people say about me? Right? So, how do we create spaces of connection by surfacing strengths so that people are more open to explore where are the fields of tension?
Underneath the words that we use are needs that we're trying to meet by speaking those words. And so we can share what's going on without saying we're going to have a feedback conversation now, because that might really feel really scary. might really trigger a shame response, a fear response. Instead, we could share, okay, what are the team members talking about? They're talking about a longing for collaboration or a longing to be heard that may not be met by moving so quickly, for example. So, for example, the underlying need that is shared by really everyone on that team is effectiveness. Everyone wants effectiveness. And yet there may be a polarity of strategies of slow and fast or process focus, outcome focus. Neither works on its own. Both sides of the polarity need each other. And so acknowledging that underlying need and then looking at what are our preferred strategies and how do we match those instead of saying one is good and one is bad.
Exactly.
I appreciate that new perspective that I'm getting from this
Yeah.
conversation.
So the psychotherapist Virginia Satir, she's a psychotherapist in the 1960s till the 1980s. I deeply love and respect her work. One of the things that she put out is the personal iceberg model. And in the personal iceberg model, whatever we see as behaviors is just really the tip of the iceberg, right? And then underneath the tip of the iceberg, we have people's coping mechanisms. And in Virginia Satter's work, you might be a blamer, you might be a placator, you might be like a supercomputer that's just so logical and analytical. Yeah. So for me, when I was reading her work, I was like, oh, those are trauma responses as well, right? You can be fight, flight, fawn, flop, or freeze responses. So she mapped it as from my behavior, then our coping stances, and then what's underneath the waterline. Underneath the waterline, we all have our feelings. And then we also have feelings about our feelings. And then going down and deeper, we have our perceptions and the stories, the beliefs, the mindsets that created these feelings. And then underneath the perceptions, we have expectations. An expectation of ourselves, expectation of another person, and expectation of the context we're in. She even goes in deeper into that layer of underneath the expectations are our yearnings, our needs, what we're longing for. And when we can reconnect to that yearnings, we can then connect to that inherent self. Unfortunately, again, being in a very trauma led society, our connection to that essence is not so easy, right? The children, when they are young, it's so easy for them to show up with their strengths, show up with their gifts. And then when you go to school and you're told, this is how you have to do this is not how you're doing it well, all these narratives, we carry that. So we lose that instant connection, that instant access to our essence. And so for me, strengths based practice is a way to reconnect it, that it's inherently there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What we're trying to do is build up this, neurobiological pathway, making it easier for us to know, oh, yeah, this connects with this part of me.
So we can show up so much more fully as our full selves and bring all of the strengths to all of the challenges that we face. So you've shared about your work with the Neurodiversity Education Academy and how our society is set up to pathologize ways that certain brains work. What can workplaces do? What can leaders do to create workplaces that really amplify the strengths of neurodiverse folks?
Yeah. So I'm going to share a bit more of language.
Thank you.
And I think this is also one of the confusion. The work around neurodiversity is relatively new. And so as a movement, as a social justice and political movement, it is such a new field that even with terminology and even with the language, people are still just grasping it. So when we're talking about neurodiversity, it's actually we're talking about all of us. Society as a whole is neurodiverse. The ways in which our nervous system and our brains are wired, they're all totally different. When we think of our fingerprints, our DNA, they're so uniquely ours. It's the same way that our nervous system is. The ways in which I would take in information would be so different with how you take in information. The ways in which I process that information would be very different from how you process information. So there's no identical way of how our nervous system takes in information. And with that, they're all wired differently.
Thank you for naming that. I really appreciate that shift in language and invite any other shifts in language that you might have. And so how do we set up workplaces in a way that allow and support all brains to really amplify their strengths to the fullest?
Within the University Foundation and University Education Academy, we don't even look at what are the specificities. There's a lot of amazing organizations who do those type of works in advocating for dyslexia, ADHD, autism awareness, and all the stuff. For us, we're more on a perspective of given that we're all wired differently, it means we all have different needs. In designing for workplaces that thrive is to look at how can we accommodate for different needs. If we go and center the conversations around that, we don't even have to talk about labels. Labels are great when you're asking for accommodation, when you're asking for support in a society. But what if we intentionally design spaces that looks for ways in which different ways of processing information, taking in information, communicating, all of this are already looked at from that lens of difference.
And how do we do that?
The ways we do that is we just be better humans together. If we're looking at it in that lens of like, how can we create an environment, like say, for example, meetings, right? It's a very common, we'll have a meeting. This is the date of the meeting. For someone who probably gets nervous in speaking up in meetings, how can you create that as an invitation for them to share their information? You can put in your email as, or in your invitation as, this is the agenda. If you have questions or thoughts around the agenda, feel free to email me about it. A blanket invitation. For someone who probably do not want to speak in a team meeting, that's an opportunity to say, now I can share my ideas. So that's one simple accommodation. It might also mean that there are people who would like to have detailed information of what the agenda is. So you can create like a short agenda for those who want less information and a more expanded agenda for those who would want to know more about the details of what we are going through. So that settles the nervous system for someone who feels unsure of getting into a space and thinking, oh, but how can I show up here?
I can imagine some listeners saying, "Oh my goodness, that would take so much work," or like, "I don't want to placate people," or like, my work already takes so much energy. I just don't have more energy to expend." If folks are listening and that comes up, I might offer this. When we do these small things with curiosity, actually our work becomes more efficient over time because efficiency is not just like how much time am I investing now, it's the effort over time. When I hear you saying these things, it's really about curiosity, infusing what we do with curiosity. Actually, these small steps, like just asking a question, like, feel free to email me. And if we do the upfront work to ask the questions and to be curious and to listen, we will prevent so many other conflicts and problems and stressful dynamics in the future. And our work becomes more efficient and more fun and more generative. And so, actually, doing these things may be a little bit of an upfront expenditure of time, but overall, they can really help decrease the burnout and the drain over time.
Exactly. And this is creating a different measurement of success, which is around relationality. If I know that the ways in which I process information is taken into consideration, that becomes me being more motivated to do my work, to share my ideas.
Great.
You bring out the best in me.
And when we measure for relationality, we do become more effective. It's not just a feel good workplace. We're excited to show up and be that good team member and listen for, oh, wow, you want to do that quick? That's actually really cool. How do we do it quick and also pay
Yes,
attention to the process?
exactly that. When we create ways to accommodate different ways of processing information, different ways of conveying information, what we're actually doing is we're creating a culture, not just of curiosity, but also a culture of care. Because it tells me as a person that you care about me. You care about me being in my best self at work. You care about me being able to bring out my ideas. You care about me showing up with my strengths. And
Yeah.
this is culture work. And culture work is not something that we do overnight. It's something that is deep work. And deep work needs time. It needs patience. It needs a cultivation. And so for those who are saying, oh, but I have so many things that I have to do already, like what you said, across time, it pays off. Because what you're trying to do is you're shifting a culture from a very pathogenic one to a salutogenic one.
And thinking about culture changes, I will also include a link to an episode with Donnie McClurkin, who's the founder of the Post Growth Institute. And we're
Mm.
talking about how capitalism leads to tension. And when I asked him, what do we do to shift out of that? He said it's the first step actually to be able to shift out of this disembodied state that capitalism brings us into is focusing on strengths. An example that he shared was that they have one meeting per month, which is in silence, and it's just using a shared Google Doc and they're just writing. He's a great speaker. He seems to enjoy talking. And also, he gets so much out of that meeting. They set it up to support more introverted folks. And he's like, this is one of the most effective meetings that we have.
And this is where, when we're again allowing for the space to hold the multiplicities in the space, right? Of like, oh, there might be some person who likes to talk more. There might be some person who would prefer writing their ideas. There might be some people who wants to take their time in digesting. And also this certain decision making, if it's not important and urgent, it might be that at the end of the day, rather than say, okay, let's get into a decision now, it might mean that, okay, so we're giving this in the next 3 days to let it, percolate, let things simmer, and then we'll send out the poll, have your decisions there. That's a different invitation for people who are processing things differently and would like to really just take things in first, right? But then there might also be people who would value getting more information first.
Yeah.
Then rather than boring everyone with, hey, these are the data, you can just add it in as an attachment. If you want to go through the data, here's the data. So these are tweaks in how we relate with each other.
That don't take that much time, actually. We're coming to the close of our time. So there's two questions that I close out with. The first is, are there any other things that you would want to leave listeners with who are struggling with conflict in their workplaces?
I often say to my kids, conflict will always be there. There has never been a point in humanity's existence that conflict has not been there. And so for us to move away from this mindset and mythology around conflict, that we can mitigate conflict or that we can be in a life without conflict, that needs to be taken out, right? So conflict will always be there. And so what's important is, how do we build our muscle to say, there was a tension there, and how can I repair it? How can I lean into different tools, different practices that would allow me to reconnect and rebuild relationships? To be curious with what the other person is experiencing, to be able to, in Filipino, we use the term kapwa, to see the shared humanity. And when we think of it as, it is not within my power to take conflict out, but it is within my agency to do repair, then that shifts the conversation differently.
It occurs to me that what you're saying is depathologizing conflict, shifting from pathologizing conflict to, ooh, this is such an opportunity for growth and for repair and to learn together. I really love that. So thank you. My last question to you is how can people learn more? I learned about your work on LinkedIn, and there's so much that you offer there and about so many different topics. And this is just one of them that I thought folks would really benefit from. So, how can people learn more from you and benefit more from the work that you do?
LinkedIn is a place to connect with me. That's one of the areas, well, the social media space that I do share more about my musings and different tools and framings and different practices. So LinkedIn is definitely a place to do that. If you're interested around the neurodiversity work, then do check out neurodiversityeducationacademy.org or Neurodiversity Foundation. They're both connected. So do check out Neurodiversity Education Academy. There's quite a lot of resources there. I also write in Substack, so you can look up my work there through Substack and connect with me through LinkedIn and send me a message if you want to dive deeper into inquiry around strengths, around neurodiversity, around feeling, and around how can we show up in Kapwa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Okay.
too.
Thank you so much for joining me. If you loved this conversation and want to hear more, I invite you to do three things. First, go to the Conflict Decoded show page wherever you listen to podcasts and tap the plus sign or click on follow. That way, you'll be the first to hear my new episodes and I will get to share them with you. Second, while you're there, if you would be willing to give the podcast a 5-star review or share it with a friend, I would be very grateful. And finally, if you are eager to receive the latest episodes by email, along with other morsels of guidance to support you and your work in the world, I invite you to subscribe to my Saturday Love Letters to Changemakers. To do this, visit callingsandcourage.com/subscribe. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take good care.